Thank you very much for having me. Once again, congratulations to the organizers for a great conference. And yeah, it's been a pleasure being back in Busan again. Um, so my name is Mamello Thinyane, and I'm going to try and do quite an ambitious talk today, talking about being human in the age of machines. It's ambitious because I'm not a philosopher, right? I mean, these are the discussions that philosophers have been having for many years. I'm a computer scientist, and a lot of the work that I've been doing has been at the intersection of digital technologies and societal issues. So I have found myself thinking a lot about how do we make sense of some of these challenges that we are facing. So part of what I'm going to do today is present a lot on a philosophical framework that helps us understand some of the discussions that we've been having here today. And hopefully you'll find it useful as well. I think with AI and with a lot of the discussions, a lot of the times we are talking past each other. Sometimes we're talking about completely different things and disagreeing about completely different things. So what I'm hoping is that this framework here, you'll find it helpful for your deliberations as well. So I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is this question: being human. If we are discussing, what it means interacting with machines, interacting with AI, and all these tools that we develop, what does it mean to be human, right? I'm not going to try to go into the history of the philosophy behind that. I'm just going to make it very personal and ask you, when do you feel most human? When do you feel most alive? This is not beyond us. This is not the purview of philosophers. It's you and I. So for me, I put that background picture there because for me, I feel most human when I'm dancing, when I'm listening to music, right? Not just any dancing, it has to be ballroom type of dancing, right? So there's a lot that's going on here. First of all, there's the music, right? There's the beautiful music that you're listening to, that you're enjoying. There's the rhythm that you have to keep up with, right? But there's also the interaction between the two people dancing. I mean, there's a lot of commitment in the dancing. There is relationship in that, right? I mean, particularly some styles of dancing, there's also where you have a leader and someone who follows, right? So there's something there about sacrifice where you choose to follow the leader, right? I mean, there's a lot happening in this simple act of dancing that we as humans do. So I don't know what that looks like for you. When do you feel most human? And I think part of what helps us think about what it means to be human as we go more into the digital physical confluence is that we need to remember what makes us human in the first place. Okay? So for me, I've always found this very interesting. This is a snippet from T.S. Eliot. This is from a play, I think, written up in the 30s or so. And he talks about where is the life we have lost in living, where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge, and where is the knowledge we've lost in information. Um, Immediately in here, of course, you can see one of the biggest challenges of our civilization and where we are going. A lot of that is about information and data. We're living in an increasingly digitalized, datafied world, and we have reduced our living to the information, to the data, to the symbolic communication. We've missed the knowledge, we've missed the wisdom, we've missed living in this increasingly digitalized world. And this is not something that's just for now. Floridi, one of the great information philosophers from Oxford, he talks about this idea of the infosphere. Right? The infosphere is this confluence of the information both in the physical and in the digital world coming together. And before you know it, the difference between those, our physical world and our online world is merged, right? So the infosphere represents this future where our life really is lived in that information space, right? There's more to life than that. There's more to life than information. There's wisdom, there's knowledge, there's life. And I'm going to refer to this later in my discussion when I talk about collective intelligence and what intelligence means. We've conflated intelligence with knowledge, with facts, with data. Intelligence is actually that value chain from data, wisdom, decision making to life outcomes. Okay, I'll come back to that later. So, what I'd like to do is introduce the philosophy of a gentleman called Herman Doyevit. He's a Dutch philosopher. He wrote a thick book called A New Critique of Western Thought. It's a 3-volume book where he lays out essentially his philosophy. One talks about philosophy of reality, and also the philosophy of the law aspect. And I'm going to talk about just the theory of aspect, which is 1 volume from his work. And I think this will be helpful for us to understand, when you talk about machines and AI and ourselves, what are we talking about specifically? So this philosophy or this theory represents ways of everyday functioning. He calls it the aspects in which all of us function. All right. So once again, if I go back to the dancing example that I gave you, all right, there is the biotic functioning in which I function as a human being. That's the biotic functioning that we engage in. There's the physical aspect as well, where the physicality of who I am, the space that we are in, everything that's physical, it's got that aspect as well. There's the aesthetics of dancing. You have to keep to the music. If you don't dance to the tune, it's not aesthetically pleasing, it's not beautiful, right? So, these are the 15 different aspects in which every day we function. Let's go a little bit into them to understand how they work, all right? Right at the bottom, not in this case, at the top, but we start with the quantitative aspect, all right? This aspect represents everything to do with discrete amounts and quantities. So if we're able to count and number, that is the quantitative functioning within that aspect. The spatial functioning, this is about dimensions, shapes, positions. We see that all around us. That's the spatial function. Kinematic functioning, motion, movement, flow, right? And those first 3, you can consider them almost as the mathematical functionings and the mathematical aspects. Take it a bit further up, you go to the physical, biotic, and sensitive functioning. So the physical, everything to do with matter, things that we see around us, atoms, objects, forces. You go up to biotic, which is what we know as the living aspect. So plants, animals, life, matter that we see around us, all of that is meaningful in the biotic sense, all right? I don't want to take too much time. You can see where I'm going, right? The biotic sense, sensitive, analytical, everything to do with conceptualization, clarifying, categorization. Lingual, which is what I'm doing now. The fact that we're able to communicate and talk, that is meaningful in the lingual sense. It's about expressions, it's about interpretation, it's about meaning, right? The social aspect is all about social interactions, membership, being part of a group. You got the economic aspect, which has to do with frugality. It's not about finances and money, it's about managing frugality. Aesthetic, juridical, it's about justice, fairness, what is due, right? What is appropriate. Ethical, goodness, self-giving love, all the way to the pistic aspect, right? So if you reflect on what I'm doing right now, you can see how right now I'm functioning across all those 15 aspects. I'm using language to make sense. I'm being mindful of time. That's an economic functioning. I'm also trying to make sure that I'm articulate and you can hear what I'm saying. That's aesthetic functioning, right? At the same time, I need to make sure that I'm saying what's correct and what's right. That's juridical functioning, right? So every day in our life, you can see these 15 aspects unfolding. I won't go too much into the beauty of this theory. I would invite you to spend some time with it, but just some things to highlight. The different aspects are dependent on each other. Okay, so this is what's called foundational dependence, where the bottom aspects support the higher aspects. Let me give you a very simple example. The lingual aspect, which is about language and making sense and understanding, that depends on the formative aspect. Formative aspect is about distinction, understanding words. It's about the syntax, right? And all of that depends on the underlying foundational aspects as well, all right? You also have what's anticipatory dependence, which is how the layers below anticipate the other layers. So once again, if you think about the economic functioning, you cannot have the economic exchange without the social aspect being in place, all right? So that's the relationship between the different aspects. It gets better. So the aspects also help us the different ways of knowing, right? So you can think about each aspect carrying a kernel meaning that defines what is meaningful and what makes sense within that particular aspect, right? So for example, quantitative, algebra, statistics, all of that makes sense within the quantitative aspect, right? All the way up to the biotic, biology, health sciences, botany, all of those make sense in the biotic functioning. Lingual, social, economic, aesthetic, as I said, hopefully that's straightforward and makes sense. It also helps us to account for the way things make sense. So if you think about, for example, relationships, primarily relationships make sense from a social aspect, right? If you try to function within a relational context, outside of that social aspect, sometimes we lose the meaningfulness of that. It also helps us to understand normativity across the different aspects, right? So if you think about the biotic aspect, we know what is a positive functioning within the biotic aspect. We also know what's a negative functioning within that, right? Health, vitality, that is a positive biotic functioning. Disease, illness, death, that is a negative functioning. So this theory allows us to define some form of normativity that we can apply when you analyze our everyday functioning. What about the lingual? Positive functioning in the lingual aspect is making sense. It's about being understandable. And negative functioning within that is misunderstanding and lack of clarity, okay? So another thing that I need to highlight is also the different modes of functioning. And I think this touches a bit on the earlier discussion around subject and object functioning. So we function as subjects across each of those different aspects when we respond to the rules of the particular subject. So let me give you an example. I'm able to function as a subject in the lingual aspect because I can speak and I can make sense. I'm a subject in that sense. The words that I speak, that's object functioning, right? So human beings, according to Day2, are the only ones who can function as subjects across all those 15 aspects. As you're going to see later, we have machines that are starting to function lingually. So how do we make sense of that? I'll tell you how we do that later. Object functioning, all the different objects can function across each of those 15 aspects. So for example, if you think about what I'm holding right now, right? If I click it, if I press it, that is more the kinematic, the physical functioning. In my case, I'm functioning as a subject. In that case, it's functioning as an object, okay? Hopefully that's clear. Sometimes it gets a bit confusing, but I'm happy to discuss it a bit more in detail later. The reason why this is important is it helps us understand when we talk about AI functioning in different aspects, okay? One last component of the theory that I think is important is this idea of the simultaneous realization of norms. This provides a really good framework for assessing the good of different activities and different technologies. So if you're thinking about any particular solution technology, you can evaluate across each of these 15 aspects, is it functioning positively or negatively? And therefore, how do we improve the positive functioning within that particular aspect? So that's a very quick run through a very complex and detailed philosophy. How do we apply that to thinking about artificial intelligence? Once again, this is one of those where we talk about different things when you talk about AI. Of course, there's the recent deep learning, large language models discussion of AI. AI used to be something very different. It used to be symbolic AI and used to have neural networks as something separate altogether. So I think in this case, when you talk about artificial intelligence, we normally use the Turing test as the evaluation of intelligence. Of course, that in itself is also a challenging test. Why? Because it assumes the lingual functioning, right? The Turing test is that you put a screen and you have either a machine and a person interacting, and are you able to assess whether it's a machine or a person, and that's the Turing test. As you can see, the basis of that test is completely on the lingual aspect. You're assessing the computer and the machine on only one of the 15 aspects. And so to talk about AI, I think we need to broaden up a bit. And this is where AI, we can use AI for reasoning and problem solving. We know all those functions. And this is what a lot of AI in the past has been about. I mean, there's been symbolic AI, which is around reasoning, it's about knowledge engineering, it's about inference, it's around logic programming. That's what the history of AI has been. It's about learning. Of course, recently, that's machine learning, but before that, it was really captured a lot in knowledge engineering, okay? Natural language processing, perception, social intelligence, and general intelligence. So from David's point of view, machines and AI can only function as subjects up to the physical aspect. What does that mean? Us talking about moral machines does not make sense in the subject functioning at all, because AI and machines cannot be moral in the subject sense. Okay? Talking about love, talking about machines understanding does not make sense at all, because understanding in the subject sense is only a human functioning. Machines can only function up to the physical level. All right? So, first of all, how do we explain some of the examples that we saw earlier? How do we explain Midjourney and DALL-E and ChatGPT generating content? Okay, so the explanation for that is there's a notion of subject by proxy or proxy subject, right? So we can have machines acting intelligently, but what that represents is the embedded information, embedded instructions from the human. I mean, even machine learning, even deep learning, ultimately, there's a human being who decides what backpropagation looks like, who decides how do you prioritize the weights, who builds the architecture of these deep learning modules. It's a human being who does that. And therefore, the subsequent functioning that looks autonomous, that looks creative, that looks like understanding, it's subject by proxy. It's not the machine itself. It's not AI itself subjectively working in that particular aspect. So hopefully this helps us understand and maybe shape our discussions a bit better, right? If you have Midjourney generating a picture, of course, it's been taught, it's learned how to predict the next pixel that looks beautiful. And therefore, it's not seeing a beautiful picture, which is why we see what we call hallucination, but the machine just sees as the next probable pixel or the next probable word. Okay? In its functioning, that's perfectly okay. Human interpretation that sees it in the lingual sense, it sees it as hallucination. Let's go to chatbots. They're not new, right? I mean, in the 60s, we had Eliza, a chatbot, which is a very simple algorithm for that. But what's interesting is the human reaction to Eliza, right? I mean, the guy who developed Eliza was actually amazed at how much people, he actually called her assistant delusional, because she was wanting to spend time with Eliza and chit-chatting and engaging with this chatbot. And he said, you know what, people who don't understand how it works are the ones who believe that it's magic, right? That's the algorithm at the top for Eliza. It's a simple substitution algorithm based on pattern matching. So whatever you tell Eliza, it flips it around, figures out what's important, and sends it back to you. Okay? Right now, we look at that, and most of us think, well, that's not impressive. Yeah, of course. I mean, see the interaction. I asked Eliza, what should I tell the audience about you today? And Eliza said, do you tell the audience about anyone else? I responded, no. And he said, you're being a bit negative. Okay. I said, yes. Eliza said, I understand. All right. That's not impressive today where we are sitting. And a lot of it doesn't make sense, right? Why? Because we are assessing it at the lingual sense. We expect it to make sense as human beings, right? Let's look at ChatGPT. The same thing, same question. What do you expect me to tell the audience today? Oh, of course, ChatGPT is smarter than that, right? It knows a bit more than that. It's still the same underlying instruction that we gave the computer at the end. We are analyzing, we're interpreting that from the lingual aspect and expecting it to make sense. So when we talk about the machine hallucinating, or we talk about ChatGPT lying, it's not doing anything different from what it's doing every other time. It's just estimating and guessing the next word. Assessing that from a lingual aspect, we see that as not making sense. Here's interesting experiment that was done. This is available on YouTube. I put a link there that you can go check it out. Basically, these guys were checking whether AI is going to replace architects. And they actually had people, the public, judge the results of AI. So they instructed AI and the architects to do a couple of things: design a building, describe that building, etc., etc. And most of the time, people actually selected the designs by AI. So you can see the example there, Midjourney, Dali, they came up with very beautiful looking buildings. But as it turns out, if you dig deeper into their designs, a lot of cracks began to appear. So you can see that bottom picture there. All of a sudden, you have spaces in the buildings that don't make sense at all. I mean, why do you have an empty space in the plan of your building, right? Why? Because Midjourney is developed to create beautiful pictures, not necessarily logical, designs of buildings, right? So we see these challenges all the time. We call it hallucination when it's text. We see it as these gaps when it's image-based. A lot of that is that we are assessing AI and machines at a different aspect, either at the aesthetic aspect, at the lingual aspect. These are aspects that do not function as a subject. So when I read quotations like this one, where it says, blah, 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 artificial ASI as a system where intelligence of a machine surpasses all forms of human intelligence in all aspects and outperforms humans in every function. I mean, immediately you see why that doesn't make sense at all. I mean, of course, computers can replace us analyzing lots of data, can replace us in crunching numbers. There's no way that a computer replaces a human across the 15 modalities of functioning, okay? And we talk about this all the time. Is the computer going to replace us or complement us? What aspect are we talking about? What level are we talking about? And therefore, the discussions become richer when we take it there. I don't have too much time. I talked about this earlier, this loop of intelligence. But I think what I see going forward, I'm happy to discuss this later, is that the interaction between humans and AI is what facilitates this intelligence where, of course, as humans, primarily collective intelligence is how we work together as people to make better decisions, to understand things better. And how do we use machines? Of course, either through instructions that we give them, through either reinforcement learning, through the human feedback, through training, through prompts. That's how we continue interacting with machines. We don't all of a sudden believe that machines can interact with us at any level other than the way that they function, okay? We've got data that comes out that we interpret. And I think part of the key challenge and why humans are amazing, we always interpret the data across the different levels. So we see the text that comes out and we see love, we see affection, we see care, right? And for me, that's the most interesting issues. The issues is around not only how machines become more anthropocentric or become more human, but also how we become more machinized. I don't know what's the expression for that. We are becoming more like machines. We're reducing our functioning to the text input, right? We're reducing our communication to just the symbolic functioning without spending time with each other, without seeing this beautiful extent of communication across the 15 aspects. So I'm happy to discuss a bit further in detail. There's a lot that I ran through, but hopefully that framework starts to help you in terms of how we discuss these issues. Thank you very much.